Chapter 5. In the low-ceiling canteen deep underground, the lunch queue moved slowly forward. The room was already crowded and very loud. From the counter, steam from the stew filled the air, mixing with a sour metallic smell that didn't quite mask the odor of Victory gin. On the far side of the room was a small bar, just a hole in the wall, where gin cost 10 cents for a large nip. "Just the man I was looking for," said a voice behind Winston. He turned around. It was his colleague Syme, who worked in the research department. Maybe colleague wasn't the right word. You didn't have friends anymore, you had comrades. Some comrades were more enjoyable to be around than others. Syme was a philologist focused on Newspeak. He was part of the large team working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak dictionary. He was short, smaller than Winston, with dark hair and large prominent eyes. They looked both mournful and mocking, as if he were scrutinizing your face while he talked. "I wanted to ask you if you had any razor blades," he said. "Not one," said Winston, feeling a bit guilty. "I've searched everywhere. They don't exist anymore." Everyone kept asking for razor blades. In reality, he had 2 unused ones that he was saving. For months, there had been a shortage. At any moment, the party shops would be out of some necessary item. Sometimes it was buttons, sometimes darning wool, sometimes shoelaces. Right now it was razor blades. You could only find them by discreetly searching the free market. "I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks, he added, untruthfully. The queue moved forward again. As they stopped, he faced Syme once more. Each of them took a greasy metal tray from a stack at the end of the counter. "Did you go see the prisoners hanged yesterday?" asked Syme. "I was at work," said Winston, sounding indifferent. "I suppose I'll see it on the news." "A very poor substitute," said Syme. His mocking eyes scanned Winston's face. "I know you," they seemed to say. "I see through you. I know exactly why you didn't go to see those prisoners hanged." In an intellectual way, Syme was staunchly orthodox. He would talk with troubling delight about helicopter raids on enemy villages, the trials and confessions of thought criminals, and the executions in the Ministry of Love's cellars. Talking to him often meant steering the conversation away from those topics and engaging him in the technicalities of Newspeak, which he found fascinating. Winston turned his head slightly to avoid the gaze of those large dark eyes. "It was a good hanging," Syme said, recalling the event. "I think it loses something when they tie the feet together. I prefer to see them kicking. And at the end, the tongue sticking out, all blue, a bright blue. That detail really stands out to me." "Next, please," shouted the prole in the white apron with the ladle. Winston and Syme slid their trays under the grill. Each received a quick serving of the standard lunch: a metal pan full of pinkish-gray stew, a chunk of bread, a cube of cheese, a mug of milkless Victory coffee, and 1 saccharine tablet. "There's a table over there under that telescreen," Syme said. "Let's grab some gin on the way." They received their gin in handleless china mugs. They navigated through the crowded room and set their trays on a metal table. On one corner, someone had left a puddle of stew, a dirty liquid mess that looked like vomit. Winston picked up his mug of gin, took a moment to steady himself, and gulped down the oily liquid. After blinking the tears from his eyes, he realized he was hungry. He began eating the stew, which, amid its overall sloppiness, had cubes of some spongy pink substance that was likely meat. Neither of them spoke until they finished their pannikins. At the table to Winston's left, someone was talking rapidly and continuously. The harsh din was almost like the quacking of a duck, cutting through the noise of the room. "How is the dictionary coming along?" Winston asked, raising his voice to be heard. "Slowly," Syme replied. "I'm working on the adjectives. It's fascinating." His mood brightened at the mention of Newspeak. He pushed his pan aside, took his bread in one hand and his cheese in the other, and leaned across the table to avoid shouting. "The 11th edition is the definitive version," he said. "We're shaping the language into its final form, the form it will take when no one speaks anything else. When we finish, people like you will have to relearn it all. You might think our main job is to invent new words, but that's not the case at all. We're eliminating words, lots of them every day. We're stripping the language down to the essentials. The 11th edition will have no words that could become outdated before the year 2050. He eagerly took a bite of his bread, chewed briefly, and continued with a sort of teacher's passion. His thin dark face lit up, his eyes losing their mocking look and becoming almost dreamy. It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. The biggest loss is in the verbs and adjectives, but there are many nouns we can remove too. There's no need for synonyms or antonyms. What justification is there for a word that's just the opposite of another? A word contains its opposite. Take good, for example. If you have a word like good, why do you need a word like bad? Ungood works just as well, better in fact, because it's an exact opposite. Or if you want a stronger version of good, why have vague words like excellent or splendid? Plus good covers that, or double plus good if you want an even stronger term. We already use those forms, but in the final newspeak, there will be nothing else. Ultimately, the whole idea of good and bad will fit into 6 words, in reality just 1 word. Don't you see the beauty in it, Winston? That idea was originally BB's, of course, he added as an afterthought. Winston's face briefly showed a hint of eagerness at the mention of Big Brother. Still, Syme sensed a lack of enthusiasm. You don't fully appreciate newspeak, Winston, he said almost sadly. When you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. I've read some of those pieces you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. Deep down, you'd rather stick to old speak, with all its ambiguity and pointless nuances. You don't grasp the beauty of word destruction. Do you know that newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year? Winston knew that, of course. He smiled, hoping it looked sympathetic, but he didn't trust himself to reply. Syme bit off another piece of the dark bread, chewed it briefly, and continued. Don't you see? The goal of newspeak is to narrow thought. In the end, we'll make thought crime literally impossible because there won't be any words to express it. Every concept that might be needed will be expressed with exactly 1 word. Its meaning rigidly defined, with all its extra meanings wiped out and forgotten. We're already not far from that point in the 11th edition, but this process will continue long after you and I are gone. Every year means fewer words and a slightly smaller range of thought. Even now, there's no reason or excuse for thought crime. It's just self-discipline, reality control, but eventually, there won't even be a need for that. The revolution will be complete when the language is perfect. Newspeak is ingsoc, and ingsoc is newspeak, he added, sounding almost mystical. Has it ever struck you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, there won't be a single human left who could understand a conversation like we're having now? Except, Winston began doubtfully, then stopped. He almost said except the proles, but held back, unsure if that comment might be seen as unorthodox. Syme, however, guessed what he was thinking. The proles aren't human, he said casually. By 2050, probably earlier, real knowledge of old speak will have vanished. The entire literature of the past will be gone. Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, Byron. They'll exist only in newspeak versions, not just altered into something different, but actually turned into something that contradicts what they used to be. Even party literature will change. Even the slogans will change. How could you have a slogan like "freedom is slavery" when the idea of freedom has been erased? The whole way of thinking will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we know it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. One day Winston thought with sudden certainty, Syme will be vaporized. He is too smart. He sees too clearly and speaks too plainly. The party does not like such people. Eventually he will vanish. It shows in his face. Winston had finished his bread and cheese. He turned slightly in his chair to drink his mug of coffee. At the table to his left, the man with the loud voice was still talking non-stop. A young woman, who might be his secretary and had her back to Winston, listened intently and seemed to agree with everything he said. Occasionally, Winston heard remarks like, "I think you're so right, I do so agree with you," spoken in a youthful and somewhat silly voice. Yet the other voice never paused, even when the girl was speaking. Winston recognized the man, but did not know much about him, except that he held an important position in the fiction department. He was about 30, with a muscular neck and a large animated mouth. His head was tilted back a bit, and because of the way he sat, His glasses caught the light and made it seem to Winston that he had no eyes. What was slightly unsettling was that it was almost impossible to understand a single word amidst the noise coming from him. Winston caught one phrase, "complete and final elimination of Goldsteinism," spit out quickly, as if it were one solid line of text. Most of it was just noise, a constant quacking. Yet, even if you couldn't actually hear what he was saying, you could guess its general meaning. He might be condemning Goldstein and calling for harsher measures against thought criminals and saboteurs. He could be ranting against the actions of the Eurasian army, or praising Big Brother or the heroes on the Malabar front. It didn't matter. Whatever it was, you could be sure every word was pure orthodoxy, pure ingsoc. As he observed the eyeless face with the jaw moving rapidly, Winston felt an odd sense that this man was not a real person but some kind of puppet. It wasn't the man's mind that was speaking, it was his larynx. The words coming out of him were not true speech. They were just sound produced without awareness, like a duck quacking. Syme had fallen silent for a moment, and was tracing patterns with the handle of his spoon in the puddle of stew. The loud voice from the other table continued to quack on, clearly audible despite the surrounding noise. "There is a word in Newspeak," Syme said. "I don't know if you know it. Duckspeak, to quack like a duck. It's one of those interesting words with two opposite meanings. When applied to an opponent, it's an insult. When used for someone you agree with, it's praise." Winston thought again that Syme would definitely be vaporized. He felt sadness, even knowing that Syme despised him and mildly disliked him. Syme would easily denounce him as a thought criminal if he found any reason to do so. There was something subtly off about Syme. He lacked discretion, distance, and a kind of protective ignorance. You couldn't say he was unorthodox. He believed in Ingsok's principles, worshipped Big Brother, celebrated victories, and genuinely hated heretics. He showed that hatred with a restless enthusiasm, and had the kind of up-to-date information that ordinary party members didn't possess. Still, a faint air of disreputability always clung to him. He said things that were better left unsaid. He read too many books. He often went to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, a hangout for painters and musicians. There was no law, not even an unwritten one, against going to the Chestnut Tree Cafe, yet the place had an unsettling reputation. The old, discredited leaders of the party used to gather there before they were eventually purged. It was said that Goldstein had sometimes been seen there years and decades ago. Syme's fate was easy to predict. Yet if Syme understood even briefly the nature of Winston's secret thoughts, he would betray him immediately to the thought police. Anyone else would too, but Syme more than most. Zeal was not enough. Orthodoxy meant being unaware. Syme looked up. "Here comes Parsons," he said. Something in his tone suggested, "That silly fool." Parsons, Winston's neighbor at Victory Mansions, was making his way across the room. He was a plump, average-sized man with fair hair and a face that resembled a frog. At 35, he was already developing rolls of fat around his neck and waist, but he moved quickly and appeared boyish. His whole look was like a little boy who had grown up. Despite wearing the regulation overalls, it was hard not to picture him in the blue shorts, gray shirt, and red neckerchief of the spies. When thinking of him, one often visualized dimpled knees and rolled-up sleeves. Parsons did indeed revert to shorts during community hikes or any physical activity that gave him an excuse. He greeted them both with a cheerful, "Hello, hello," and sat down at the table, giving off a strong smell of sweat. Beads of moisture dotted his pink face. He had an extraordinary ability to sweat. At the community center, you could always tell when he played table tennis by how damp the bat handle became. Syme had pulled out a piece of paper with a long list of words, and was examining it with an ink pencil between his fingers. "Look at him working away during lunch," Parsons said, nudging Winston. "Keen, eh? What's that you've got there, old boy? Something too smart for me, I expect. Smith, old boy, I wanted to catch you about that subscription you forgot to give me." "Which subscription is that?" said Winston, automatically reaching for his money. About a quarter of one's salary had to be saved for voluntary contributions, which were so many that it was hard to keep track. "For Hate Week. You know, the house-to-house fund. I'm the treasurer for our block. We're making a big push, going to put on a great show." I tell you, it won't be my fault if Old Victory Mansions doesn't have the biggest collection of flags on the whole street. You promised me $2. Winston pulled out and handed over 2 wrinkled, filthy notes. Parsons wrote them down in a small notebook, in the neat handwriting of someone who was illiterate. By the way, old boy, he said, I hear that little brat of mine took a shot at you with his catapult yesterday. I gave him a good scolding for it. I even told him I'd take the catapult away if he did it again. I think he was a bit upset about not going to the execution, said Winston. Ah, well, what I mean is, it shows the right spirit, doesn't it? Those little rascals are full of mischief, but they're really keen. All they think about is the spies and, of course, the war. Do you know what my little girl did last Saturday, when her troop went hiking out near Berkhamsted? She got 2 other girls to go with her, slipped away from the hike, and spent the entire afternoon following a strange man. They tailed him for 2 hours through the woods, and when they got to Amersham, they handed him over to the patrols. What did they do that for? Said Winston, somewhat surprised. Parsons went on triumphantly. My kid made sure he was some kind of enemy agent. He might have dropped in by parachute, for instance. But here's the kicker, old boy. What do you think tipped her off in the first place? She noticed he was wearing odd shoes, said she'd never seen anything like them before. So she figured he was a foreigner. Pretty clever for a 7-year-old, right? What happened to the man? Asked Winston. I couldn't say, of course. But I wouldn't be totally shocked if... Parsons pretended to aim a rifle, and clicked his tongue for the explosion. Good, said Syme absently, still focused on his paper. Of course we can't take risks, Winston agreed dutifully. What I mean is there is a war going on, said Parsons. Just then, a trumpet call floated down from the telescreen above them. However, it wasn't an announcement of a military victory. It was just a message from the Ministry of Plenty. Comrades, cried a youthful voice. Attention, comrades. We have glorious news for you. We've won the battle for production. Returns are in for the output of all types of consumer goods, showing that the standard of living has risen by 20% over the past year. All over Oceania this morning, people celebrated spontaneously as workers marched out of factories and offices, parading through the streets with banners, showing their gratitude to Big Brother for the new, happy life his wise leadership has given us. Here are some of the results. Food. The phrase, our new happy life, came up several times. This had become a favorite of the Ministry of Plenty lately. Parsons, his attention caught by the trumpet call, sat listening with a sort of slack-jawed seriousness, almost as if he were bored but enlightened. He couldn't keep up with the figures, but he knew they were somehow supposed to make him feel happy. He had pulled out a large filthy pipe that was half filled with burnt tobacco. With the tobacco ration at 100 grams a week, it was rarely possible to fill a pipe completely. Winston was smoking a Victory cigarette, holding it carefully horizontal. The new ration would not begin until tomorrow, and he had only 4 cigarettes left. For now, he had blocked out the distant noises and was focused on the content streaming from the telescreen. There had even been rallies to thank Big Brother for increasing the chocolate ration to 20 grams per week. Just yesterday, he thought, it had been announced that the ration would be reduced to 20 grams per week. Was it possible for people to accept that after just 24 hours? Yes, they accepted it. Parsons accepted it easily, with the dullness of an animal. The creature at the other table accepted it with enthusiasm, eagerly wanting to track down, expose, and destroy anyone who dared to say that the ration had been 30 grams last week. Syme too, in a more complicated way involving contradictory thinking. Syme accepted it. Was he the only one who remembered differently? The wild claims continued to flow from the telescreen. Compared to last year, there was more food, more clothes, more houses, more furniture, more pots, more fuel, more ships, more helicopters, more books, and more babies, more of everything except disease, crime, and madness. Year after year, minute after minute, everything and everyone seemed to be rapidly improving. Like Syme had done earlier, Winston picked up his spoon and stirred the pale gravy on the table, pulling it out into a pattern. He quietly reflected on the unpleasant nature of life. Had it always been this way? Did food always taste like this? He surveyed the canteen. It was a low-ceilinged, crowded room, with grimy walls worn by countless bodies. There were battered metal tables and chairs crammed together, forcing elbows to touch. He noticed bent spoons, dented trays, and coarse white mugs. Every surface was greasy, grime filled every crack, and there was a sour mixture of bad gin, bad coffee, metallic stew, and dirty clothes hanging in the air. His stomach and skin constantly protested, sensing they had been denied something they deserved. He realized he had no memories of anything significantly better. In his recollection, there had always been insufficient food, socks or underclothes full of holes, battered and shaky furniture, cold rooms, crowded tube trains, dilapidated houses, dark bread, rare tea, bad-tasting coffee, and not enough cigarettes, nothing cheap and plentiful, except synthetic gin. Though it worsened with age, wasn't it strange to feel such discomfort, dirt, and scarcity? The long winters, the feeling of stuck socks, the broken elevators, the cold water, the gritty soap, the crumbling cigarettes, and the food with its strange bad tastes. Why did it feel intolerable unless he had some ancestral memory of better times? He looked around the canteen again. Nearly everyone was unattractive, and even if they wore something other than the standard blue overalls, they would still be ugly. At the far side of the room, a small, peculiar man was drinking coffee, his tiny eyes darting suspicious glances. Winston thought about how easy it was to believe that the party's ideal physical type, tall, muscular young men and robust young women, with blonde hair and sun-kissed skin, actually existed and dominated the population. But as far as he could see, most people in Airstrip 1 were short, dark, and unattractive. It was interesting how that beetle-like type was prevalent in the ministries. Little stout men who became round early in life, with short legs, quick movements, and inscrutable faces topped with small eyes. This type seemed to thrive under the party's rule. The Ministry of Plenty's announcement ended with another trumpet call, and switched to tinny music. Parsons, stirred by the flood of numbers, took his pipe out. "The Ministry of Plenty has certainly done a good job this year," he said, nodding knowingly. "By the way, Smith, old boy, I suppose you don't have any razor blades to spare?" "Not a single one," Winston replied. "I've been using the same blade for 6 weeks. "Ah, well, I just thought I'd ask." "Sorry," Winston said. The loud voice from the next table, muted during the ministry's announcement, started again as boisterous as ever. Winston suddenly thought of Mrs. Parsons, with her thin hair and the dust in her face. Within 2 years, those children would be denouncing her to the thought police. Mrs. Parsons would be eliminated. Syme would be eliminated. Winston would be eliminated. O'Brien would be eliminated. Parsons, on the other hand, would not be eliminated. The loud creature with the quacking voice would not be eliminated. The little beetle-like men scuttling through the winding corridors of the ministries, they too would not be eliminated. And the girl with dark hair from the fiction department, she would not be eliminated either. He felt he knew instinctively who would survive and who would die. Still, he couldn't quite explain why some survived. At that moment, he was snapped from his thoughts. The girl at the next table turned slightly and looked at him. It was the girl with dark hair. She was watching him sideways, but with intense curiosity. As soon as she caught his eye, she looked away. Sweat broke out along Winston's spine. A wave of fear shot through him. It faded quickly but left behind a nagging unease. Why was she watching him? Why did she keep following him? Unfortunately, he could not remember if she had been at the table when he arrived, or if she had come afterward. However, during the 2 minutes hate yesterday, she had sat directly behind him when there was no reason to do so. Her real goal might have been to listen to him, and ensure he was shouting loud enough. He recalled his earlier thought. She probably was not a member of the thought police, but the amateur spy posed the greatest danger. He didn't know how long she had been watching him, but it might have been 5 minutes. It's possible his expression had not been tightly controlled. It was extremely risky to let your mind wander in public or near a telescreen. The slightest detail might reveal you. A nervous twitch, a look of worry, or muttering to oneself could suggest something was wrong. In any case, showing an inappropriate expression, like looking shocked when a victory was announced, was a punishable offense. In Newspeak it even had a name, face crime. The girl had turned her back on him again. Maybe she wasn't really following him. Perhaps it was just coincidence that she sat so close to him 2 days in a row. His cigarette had gone out, so he carefully set it on the edge of the table. He planned to finish it after work if he could keep the tobacco. The person at the next table might be a thought police spy, and he could be in the Ministry of Love's cellars within 3 days. But he wouldn't waste a cigarette end. Syme folded his strip of paper and put it in his pocket. Parsons began talking again. "Did I ever tell you, old boy," he said, chuckling around his pipe, "about the time when my 2 kids set fire to the old market woman's skirt because they saw her wrapping up sausages in a bee poster? They snuck up behind her and burned her pretty badly, I think. Little troublemakers, eh? But they are so eager. The training they get in the spies now is better than in my day. What do you think is the latest tool they've given them? Ear trumpets for listening through keyholes. My little girl brought one home the other night and tried it at our sitting room door. She thought she could hear twice as much as with her ear to the hole. Of course, it's just a toy, mind you. Still, it gives them the right idea, doesn't it?" Just then, the telescreen let out a sharp whistle. It was the call to return to work. All 3 men jumped to their feet to join the rush around the lifts, and the last bit of tobacco fell from Winston's cigarette. If you like our recordings, consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, so you don't miss any more audiobooks. And next part coming soon. Till then, take care, bye.